Sebastián Aranda had gone 14 years without choking on anything. Not on the 7 a.m. coffee he drank standing up in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office while Madrid was still asleep. Not on the news. Not on the 8-figure contracts he signed with the same expression other people use to sign a grocery receipt. Not on difficult meetings, impossible clients, or deadlines that others considered a cruel joke and he considered a starting point. Sebastián Aranda did not choke. It was, among the many things that defined him, one of the most consistent. Until a Tuesday in October, at 6:43 in the evening, when his phone vibrated on the desk with a WhatsApp notification. He opened the message on reflex, a 28-minute audio from Mia Serrano, and took a sip of coffee as he pressed play. The problem was the exact moment her voice said, with a disarming casualness and the background noise of the Madrid metro. "And look, I already know what you're going to say, that I need to get out, meet people, step away from work for a while. But Lau, seriously, tell me, who's going to want to go out with a 25-year-old girl who has zero experience in absolutely anything? And when I say nothing, I mean nothing, nothing, nothing. Yeah, I understand the theory perfectly. Thanks for your unsolicited educational talks. But actually putting any of it into practice? I don't know. I'm just not convinced that my first time has to be with someone who spells hello without the H dot." The coffee went down the wrong way. Sebastián Aranda, CEO of Aranda Architecture and Engineering, the man an entire boardroom watched when he walked in because the air itself shifted, choked on his coffee like a teenager hearing a joke in the middle of class. He coughed once. Twice. He looked at the phone. The audio was still running. And that, friends, is where everything began. Though he would take quite a while to admit it. If you already know this is going to be a magnificent disaster, hit like before it even starts, and subscribe to fall in love with this story so you don't miss what's coming. Mia Serrano Valdez had arrived in Madrid 18 months earlier with one large suitcase, one small suitcase, a portfolio of projects she had built over 5 years of study, and the absolute conviction that she was going to prove the move had been worth it. What she hadn't precisely calculated was that proving anything in Madrid required, among other things, not collapsing from exhaustion before 9 at night. Cudillero, Asturias, was 5 hours away by car and an entire world away in every other sense. The colorful houses stacked on the cliffside. The harbor with the boats rocking gently. The square where Martín kicked a soccer ball with a determination wildly disproportionate to his 7 years. The smell of the sea and her mother's cooking, her mother who was no longer there, but whom her sister Laura recreated with a faithfulness that sometimes made Mia's throat close without warning. Her father, Ernesto. 67 years old. Retired. Hypertensive. Stern. A 5-medication daily regimen that the two sisters supervised from a distance, with the cardiologist as referee and a small blue plastic pill organizer as the battlefield. Laura supervised that organizer with the quiet obsession of someone who knows exactly how fragile something is and chooses not to say it out loud. All of that was back there. Here, there were blueprints, screens, machine coffee, and Sebastián Aranda. Aranda Architecture and Engineering occupied the 5th floor of a building in the Justicia neighborhood. Glass, steel, dark wood, and the permanent sensation that even the walls were working. The team was small for the scale of the projects, 40 people total, and within that universe, a team of 4 young architects who reported directly to the CEO. Mia was one of them. The other 3 were Pablo Ruiz, 28, relentlessly friendly, with a tendency to arrive 3 minutes late that Sebastián either hadn't noticed or had decided to ignore the way you ignore a fly that isn't worth the energy. Carla Vega, 27, precise and competitive with the elegance of someone who knows she can afford to be. And Daniel Fonseca, 30, the quietest of the group and the only one who, according to Mia's theory, slept in the office, because he was always there when she arrived and still there when she left. And then there was Mia. With her copper hair that couldn't decide if it was straight or wavy. Her green eyes that looked gray on the computer screen. And a way of seeing projects that the others simply didn't have, which wasn't arrogance. It was just what Hugo Valcarcel, Sebastian's partner, had said to her during the only informal conversation they'd had in 18 months, at the previous year's Christmas coffee. You see spaces differently, Mia. I don't know how to explain it. Like you understand what the air between things is actually for. Mia didn't know what to say to that. She said, "Thank you," in a voice too small for the compliment. Sebastian's comments were different. Good. I like it. Perfect. 3 words that, coming from him, were the equivalent of a standing ovation. Mia knew this because she had watched long enough. Sebastian Aranda didn't praise people. He didn't ask how you were doing. He didn't arrive at meetings with small talk. He arrived, observed, decided, and if there was something worth saying, he said it with the precision of someone who treats every word as an investment. What yielded no return, he didn't spend. That made his single syllables worth a fortune. It also made his gaze a problem. Sebastian Aranda looked at you in a way that made everything you said feel like too much. It wasn't hostility. It was pure concentration, the same he applied to blueprints, contracts, negotiations. But when that concentration landed on you, the sensation was that he was calculating something you didn't yet know needed to be calculated. Mia had spent 18 months calibrating exactly how many words she could say before that gaze made her lose the thread. The answer was, not many. The incident in the meeting room had happened 2 months earlier. A Wednesday afternoon. Progress presentation on the Llorente project. Large conference room. The 4 architects plus Sebastian and Hugo. Mia was explaining the facade proposal when her phone vibrated. She ignored it. It vibrated again. She ignored it again. It vibrated 5 times in a row with the urgency of something important, and the buzzing against the glass table was perfectly audible to everyone in the room. Sebastian looked at her. Any problem? 2 words. The weight of a ton. No, I send voice messages to my sister every day when I leave work. Yesterday I couldn't send one and she worries. She thinks I'm our mom, Mia added. And then immediately regretted saying that last part, because it was information he hadn't asked for. And now he was looking at her with that expression that wasn't exactly anything, but somehow contained everything. Continue, he said. And Mia continued, with the phone on silent, while Laura sent 3 more voice messages she would find on her way out. What Mia didn't tell Sebastian, because he didn't ask, and because when he didn't ask the silence closed like a door, was that Laura's worry had a name and a face. Ernesto Serrano. 67. Retired. Hypertensive. Severe. A 5-medication regimen the 2 sisters supervised from a distance, with the cardiologist as referee and the blue pill organizer as battlefield. She didn't tell him that Martine was 7 and had a pact with her about who would win at soccer on the next visit. Or that Nico, at 4, had promised her a drawing of a dinosaur architect that still hadn't arrived in the mail. She didn't tell him that she had left all of that, the sea, the village, the Sundays in the square, the smell of home, because she wanted to learn from him. Because Aranda architecture was exactly where she wanted to be. Because he, in professional terms, with every nuance that phrase could hold, was the reason she had packed her suitcase. She didn't tell him any of it. Because he never asked. And because when he looked at her, Mia always felt that whatever she said was somehow too much. What she did do, every single day without exception, was put in her earbuds the moment she stepped out of the building and talked to Laura for the entire walk home. A few minutes on foot to the metro entrance near the office. 40 minutes on line 5. Then the final 10 minutes on foot from the metro exit to her front door. That last stretch was always the worst for signal, a couple of narrow streets where the phone lost coverage just before she got home, which meant the audio almost always cut off mid-sentence, and Laura received the rest the next day, or never. Laura called it Mia's podcast. Mia said that was an exaggeration. Laura said that nearly half an hour of daily one-way audio, covering topics ranging from the Castellana project blueprints to her sister's unprocessed emotions and the status of their father's medication, was, clinically, a podcast. Mia said it was cheap therapy. Laura said it was the same thing. That Tuesday, Mia left the office at 6:20, late by the world standards, reasonably on time by Aranda architecture standards, and a personal record by that particular week's standards, which had already included an emergency review of the Bilbao project on Monday at 9 at night and a call with the Herrera client on Tuesday at 7 in the morning. She walked out through the revolving door of the building, felt the October air of Madrid, which already had that sharp edge that in Cudillero arrived in August, and plugged in her earbuds with the automatism of someone who has done the exact same thing for 18 months. She found Laura's chat, opened the microphone, started walking toward the metro, and began. Lau, hi. It's 6:20 and I'm leaving, so technically today I'm improving. Don't make that face. I know you even though I can't see you. I know you were worried yesterday. And yes, part of that was my fault. I stayed until 9 reviewing the Bilbao blueprints and by the time I left I didn't have enough brain left to record the audio. But I'm fine. I'm here. This is your daily Mia Serrano podcast, Tuesday edition, lots of wind, very little patience. Today, Mr. Aranda said perfect while looking at the model I delivered last week. Perfect. 3 syllables. He said it looking at the screen without lifting his eyes, the way someone might comment on the weather. And yet, I nearly fainted right there between the polished concrete and the structural blueprints. You can laugh. Go ahead. But coming from that man, that word is the professional equivalent of a declaration of love with fireworks included. The rest of the team can deliver an entire presentation and he says, good, and everyone moves on. He said, perfect, to me. So this Tuesday, practically speaking, has been a good day. Although I'll also tell you, because this is the podcast and we tell the truth here, working for Sebastián Aranda is like trying to have a conversation with a very expensive, very well-designed building. Beautiful. Impressive. Clearly built by someone with real talent. But completely incapable of responding. He doesn't ask anything. He doesn't comment on anything that isn't strictly necessary. He just looks. And when he looks, when that man looks at you, you need an evacuation plan, because the feeling is that he's processing information you didn't know you were giving away. Today he looked at me during a review and I literally forgot the client's name. The client we've been working with for 6 months. Yeah. That's where we are. And I already know what you're going to say before you say it. You said it last Thursday and the Tuesday before that. You're going to tell me I need to get out, meet people, that Madrid is an enormous city with millions of people and that if I spend my weekends at home reviewing blueprints, I'm wasting something. I know, Lau. In theory, I know that perfectly. But tell me honestly, who is going to want to go out with a 25-year-old girl who has zero experience in absolutely anything? And when I say nothing, I mean nothing, nothing, nothing. Zero. A blank card. A romantic history that fits on an empty business card. Yes, I understand the theory. Thank you for your unsolicited educational talks over the years. Very thorough, really. But the idea that one day something's actually going to click for me in practice? I'm not convinced. Because honestly, who would it even be with? Someone from an app who spells hello without the H and sends gym photos at 11 at night? No, Lau. I can't. I have minimum spelling standards, and I'm also exhausted. That's also true. I get home, I eat whatever I can heat up in 10 minutes, and I fall asleep reading the technical report I should have finished at the office. That's not a social life, I know. But it's not urgent right now either. I'm 25, Lau. Not 40. There's time. Although sometimes, just sometimes, when I see people on the street walking hand in hand, looking like they have it all figured out, I wonder if I chose the wrong order of things. Work first. Everything else after. The problem is that everything else has been on pause for 18 months and it's starting to feel like it doesn't have a resumption date. Anyway. That's enough introspection for today's podcast. How's Dad? And don't just say, fine, automatically, I mean it. Did he take all his pills? Actually ask him. Don't trust what he says on his own, because you know he cheats on the evening one because it makes him sleepy, which is exactly the point, that's why they prescribed it. But he has his own opinions about modern medicine that I do not share. Tell Martine I'm still training, that I'm going to beat him next time I visit even if I break a leg trying, and that's a promise. And tell Nico I'm still waiting for the dinosaur architect. 3 weeks now. Not okay. Alright. I'm almost home, rounding the corner. Signal always cuts here, so if this stops mid-sentence, you know why. Sending you a huge kiss. Give one to the kids for me and one to Dad, and tell him I'll call Thursday because Wednesday I have a late review. Tay. She pressed send. Or thought she did. Line 5 of the Madrid Metro has very poor signal on the final stretch before her home. And Mia carried her phone in the side pocket of her coat, a thick fabric that accidentally activated things with a regularity that should have prompted her to change coats months ago. What happened, exactly, was this. The audio was sent. But not to Laura. At 6:43 in the evening, Sebastián Aranda received on his phone a 28-minute voice message from Mia Serrano Valdez, architect on his team, 25 years old, copper-haired, quiet, efficient. And he opened it. Sebastián listened to all of it. It wasn't a conscious decision. At first it was inertia, the audio had come from her, it was probably about the Bilbao project, there was likely something urgent. And then it was the fact that within the first 30 seconds, Mia's voice had a quality unlike anything he had ever heard from her before. Something in that difference made it impossible to stop. The Mia he knew in the office spoke in short, measured sentences. The Mia in the audio spoke the way people think when no one is watching. In spirals. With jumps. With humor that appeared when least expected. With an honesty that didn't ask permission. The coffee was the first problem. The second problem was that after choking on it, instead of closing the audio and deleting it and behaving like the reasonable adult he considered himself to be, Sebastián Aranda leaned back in his office chair with the phone in his hand and kept listening. He listened to the perfect part and felt something strange in his chest that he decided not to examine. He listened to the part where she said working for him was like trying to talk to a very expensive building, and had the strange reaction of wanting, for the first time in years, to be a less expensive building. He listened to the part about experience. Nothing of nothing. Zero. A blank card. And that was when the coffee made its disastrous appearance. That was also when something he had been filing away for 18 months under the label of professionalism, began to shift, with a discomfort that had nothing professional about it. He listened to the part about her father. 5 pills. The blue organizer. The cardiologist. The evening pill Ernesto cheated on because it made him sleepy. He listened to the part about the nephews, Martine and the soccer, Nico and the dinosaur architect drawing that had been pending for 3 weeks. He listened to the part where she said that sometimes, just sometimes, she saw couples on the street holding hands and wondered if she had chosen the wrong order of things. And when the audio ended, cut off mid-word right in the middle of a TE that never finished, Sebastián stared at the ceiling of his office in silence for approximately 4 minutes. Then he looked at the phone. Then at the chat. The name at the top said, Mia Serrano. Not Laura. Mia Serrano had accidentally sent him 28 minutes of her private life, her fears, her family, her sick father, her nephews, her loneliness in Madrid, her lack of experience, her opinion of him. Sebastián Aranda, who ran companies, closed contracts, and made million-euro decisions with the emotional temperature of someone choosing from a menu, had absolutely no idea what to do with any of it. What he did know, with a clarity that annoyed him, was that he couldn't unhear it. And that Mia Serrano, with her copper hair and her way of frowning over blueprints and her 28 minutes of accidental honesty, was never going to fit in the team folder the same way she had before. That night, Sebastian Aranda did not sleep well. It wasn't insomnia in the dramatic sense. It was something smaller and more irritating. He lay awake in bed in his Salamanca apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying loose phrases from the audio, the way you can't stop pressing a fresh bruise to check if it still hurts. Blank card. Very expensive building. Someone who spells hello without the H. At 2 a.m. he gave up, turned on the bedside light, and sat for a moment looking at the phone, which still had the audio saved in the conversation, waiting there like evidence of a crime he wasn't sure yet whether he had committed. For a man who didn't choke on anything, the situation was unsettling. For us, watching from the outside, it was simply the beginning. Wednesday morning, Mia arrived at the office at 8:45 with a coffee in hand and the Bilbao project folder under her arm, ready for the 9 o'clock review. Sebastian was already in his office. That was not unusual. What was unusual was that when she passed in front of the glass door, he looked up. He didn't say anything. He didn't make any gesture. He looked at her for 1 second, 1 second too long, though she had no way of knowing that, and returned to his papers. What Mia couldn't see, because glass walls only show what's in front of them and not what's behind someone's thoughts, was that Sebastian Aranda had arrived at the office at 7:30, a full hour earlier than usual, because at home, alone, the silence had become an uncomfortable place to be. At 9:10, during the review, Sebastian asked, for the first time in 18 months, if anyone had eaten breakfast. Complete silence in the room. Pablo looked at Carla. Carla looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Mia. Mia looked at Sebastian. Sorry, said Pablo, because he was the only one with enough suicidal confidence to say it out loud. If you've had breakfast, Sebastian repeated, in the same tone he would have used to ask if they'd reviewed the blueprints, as if breakfast were a KPI. I did, said Carla, cautiously. Me too, said Daniel. I had a coffee, said Pablo. Everyone looked at Mia. Yes, I did, said Mia, which was technically true, since she had eaten a cereal bar on the metro and that counted. Sebastian nodded, apparently satisfied, and continued with the review as if nothing had happened. Nobody in that room, not even Mia, had any way of knowing that the question had come from a very specific image Sebastian couldn't get out of his head. The line from the audio about getting home and eating whatever she could find, which most days was whatever she could heat up in 10 minutes. A line said half laughing, with no intention of generating sympathy. And yet Sebastian, who had never in his life thought about what anyone on his team ate, had been thinking about exactly that since 2 a.m. At 1:15, he appeared in the open workspace with a tray of sandwiches and said, without looking at anyone in particular, that they were left over from a morning meeting and someone should eat them. Hugo Valcarcel, who happened to be passing through the hallway, stopped at the doorway and watched the scene with the expression of someone who has just witnessed an unexplained meteorological phenomenon. Since when do you bring food for the team? He asked Sebastian quietly when the two were alone in the hallway. They were left over from the meeting. Sebastian. There was no meeting this morning. There was a call. A call doesn't generate physical sandwiches. Hugo. I have work. Hugo looked at him 3 seconds longer than necessary, then walked away down the hallway with the expression of someone storing information for later use. That evening, Sebastian went to the gym. He did this 3 times a week, always at the same time, always the same routine, with the same quiet discipline he applied to everything else. He normally didn't look around. That evening, without quite knowing why, he looked across the room. A girl, no older than Mia, he calculated, and hated that he'd made that calculation, was doing exercises with dumbbells, focused, with her earbuds in. A man approached. Easy smile. A comment about her form. A hand offering to correct her grip with a familiarity nobody had asked for. The girl smiled politely, visibly uncomfortable, and went back to her workout. The man pressed a little longer before leaving. Sebastian, who was holding a barbell and should have been thinking about anything else, watched the scene with a tension in his jaw that had nothing to do with the exercise. And he thought of Mia. Not in an abstract way. He thought of Mia walking to the metro every evening, alone, earbuds in, telling her sister she had no experience with anyone, that no one had touched her, that no one had said anything to her that wasn't either forward or completely empty. He thought about how many men like that one, in how many gyms, in how many metro carriages, had approached her with easy smiles and hands offering to correct things that didn't need correcting. He thought that someone should be watching out for that. And then, with the barbell still in his hands and a clarity that hit him like a bucket of cold water, he understood something he had been avoiding understanding for 24 hours. That he himself, since Tuesday at 6:43 in the evening, had not gone a single minute of the day without thinking about her. That he had looked at her more in the last 18 hours than in the previous 18 months. That the word that came to mind to describe it was not protection. It was something else entirely. He finished the set, put down the barbell, left the gym earlier than usual. That night, in his penthouse apartment with the lit-up city on the other side of the windows, Sebastian Aranda did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He poured himself a glass of wine, sat on the sofa, and played the audio again. Not all of it. Just certain parts. He listened again to the very expensive building part, and this time, without the shock of the first impact, he smiled. A brief smile, almost against his will, the kind that didn't come easily to Sebastian Aranda. He listened again to the "you need an evacuation plan" part and laughed out loud, alone on his sofa with a glass of wine, laughing at how a 25-year-old girl described him, fully convinced he had no sense of humor. He listened again to the part about Nico's dinosaur architect and for the first time wondered what that drawing would look like. If it would have a hard hat. If it would have a blueprint. He did not go back to the experience part. Or the jaw part. Or the prince part. Those parts didn't need to be repeated. They already lived inside him with a permanence he had no intention of fighting. That same Wednesday night, the same night Sebastian was listening to the audio again with a glass of wine, completely unknown to Mia. Mia was in her apartment in pajamas, hair thrown up in whatever shape it landed, a plate of reheated pasta on her lap, when her phone rang. It was Laura. A real call, not an audio. "Everything okay," said Laura, skipping the greeting. That was her way of greeting. "Why?" "Because yesterday I got nothing." "I'm telling you because you know that when nothing arrives I worry, and last night I spent the whole evening thinking something might have happened to you until Martine told me you were definitely alive, because otherwise someone would have called from the company. Martine is 7. Martine is 7 and has better common sense than you sometimes." Mia froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Wait, I sent it. I'm sure. I recorded it walking to the metro, same as always." "Well, check it, because nothing arrived here." Mia opened her chat with Laura. The last audio there was from Monday. "That's strange," she said, more to herself than to Laura. "Hold on, let me look." And then she did something she had never done before. She scrolled through the full list of recent conversations. And there it was. At the very top. More recent than her Laura chat. A sent audio. 28 minutes. Tuesday, 6:43 in the evening. Recipient, Sebastian Aranda. Mia put down her fork. "Mia," said Laura on the other end. "Still there?" "Lau. Lau, I think I have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Mia closed her eyes. Opened them. Looked at the screen again as if looking again could change the name sitting there. "I sent the audio to my boss." Silence on the other end of the line. "Which audio?" "The audio, Lau. The audio. Yesterday's. The Mia one." She lowered her voice even though she was alone in her apartment. "The one about the experience and the jaw and the expensive building and Dad and the kids. All of it." All 28 minutes. Another silence. Longer this time. Mia, said Laura, with a calm that only made things worse. You sent your boss an audio where you say he's attractive, that his jaw has you obsessed, and that you're a virgin. Yes. Yesterday. Yesterday. And today you went to work. Today I went to work, Lau. I didn't know any of this until right now. Mia got up from the sofa, sat back down, got up again, walked to the window, came back, and did a mental review, sentence by sentence, of all 28 minutes, with the growing horror of someone opening drawers and finding worse and worse things in each one. The jaw part, she said, almost voiceless. Lau. The jaw part. I remember that part well. That was written by you. It's not a joke, Lau. A little bit it is. No, Lau. Okay. First important question, has he listened to it? Mia went still. That question hadn't occurred to her. She had been so consumed by the fact that the audio existed and had reached its destination that she hadn't yet gotten to the next question, which was, obviously, the only one that actually mattered. I don't know, she said, very slowly. How do you not know? Because I can't ask him, Lau. I can't say, hey, did you listen to the 28-minute audio where I talked about your body? That would end my career, my life, and probably my ability to ever look anyone in the eyes again. So you don't know. I don't know. And today he acted normal. Mia thought about the breakfast question. The sandwiches. In the moment, those two things had just seemed strange. Now, suddenly, they were clues, pieces of a puzzle that could mean two completely opposite things. Either he hadn't listened to anything and was simply having an unexplained philanthropic day, or he had heard everything and this was, in some way Mia couldn't yet process, his response. I don't know, she said again, which was going to become the most repeated phrase of her week. Today he asked if we'd had breakfast. What? And he brought sandwiches. Mia. I don't know, Lau. That night Mia recorded the Overdue Tuesday podcast, the real one, the one Laura had never received, in a much shorter, much quieter version, where she said she was tired, that the day had been strange, and that they'd better talk tomorrow. Laura, who had spent 29 years being Mia Serrano's sister, listened to that 40-second audio and knew, with the certainty of someone who has known another person their whole life, that something big was happening. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. Thursday was worse. Pablo Ruiz, 28 years old, relentlessly friendly, and not yet in possession of the survival instinct that would have told him that walking up to Mia's desk to offer her a coffee with an overly wide smile was, on that particular day, an idea with consequences, leaned over her workstation. Mia, can I get you something from the machine? I'm going for coffee. Mia looked up from the screen. Oh, thanks, Pablo. With milk would be great. Sure, said Pablo, with that smile. From the back office behind the glass wall, Sebastian looked up from his papers. He said nothing. He did nothing. He simply watched Pablo come back with 2 coffees, one for himself, one for Mia, and leave them on the desk with a comment about the project that made Mia laugh a short, natural laugh. Sebastian returned to his papers. 5 minutes later he came out of his office, walked calmly over to Pablo, and said, Pablo, the Herrera project presentation, is it reviewed? Pablo blinked. Almost. I still need the materials annex. For today. Today. Today, confirmed Sebastian, and returned to his office. Pablo looked at Mia with the expression of a shipwreck survivor. Mia gave him a sympathetic shrug and went back to her blueprints. In the hallway, Hugo was waiting for Sebastian with arms crossed and a smile that didn't bode well. Pablo isn't flirting, said Hugo. Pablo isn't delivering annexes on time. Pablo was offering coffee. That's called being friendly. Pablo flirts with caffeine. Hugo blinked. Then said, Did you know Mia has a sick father? She left her family behind in Asturias to come work here. Sebastian stopped. Yes, he said, with a naturalness that had no rational explanation, given that 48 hours ago he'd known nothing of the sort. Hugo stared at him. Since when do you know that? It's not relevant when, Sebastian. Hugo. Are you okay? I have work. And that was that. Sebastian walked into his office and closed the door with a firmness that didn't quite make it a slam, but in Sebastian Aranda's dictionary, it was the equivalent of one. Hugo Valcarcel had been that man's business partner for 12 years. He had witnessed impossible negotiations, impossible clients, impossible deadlines. He had never seen him offer sandwiches 2 days in a row. He made a mental note. And underlined it. Friday, Sebastian offered to drive Mia home. It was 8 in the evening. It had rained. Mia was packing up her things with her coat already on when he appeared in the doorway of the open workspace. Do you live far from the metro? He said. Mia looked at him with a level of attention that the question, in normal circumstances, would not have warranted. Sorry. It's going to rain more. You live 10 minutes on foot from your stop. I'll drive you. It's really not necessary. Mia. That was the other problem with Sebastian Aranda. When he said your name like that, with that absolute economy, there wasn't much room for negotiation. Mia got into the car with her heart beating at a speed that had nothing to do with the rain. Every second of that drive was, for her, one more piece of evidence. If he had heard everything, this car, this sudden kindness, this, Mia, said that way, were the final proof. If he hadn't heard anything, then Sebastian Aranda had simply become, from one day to the next, a considerate human being, which was statistically less probable than the other option. They stopped in front of her building. Thank you, said Mia. You're welcome, said he. She got out. He waited until she was inside before pulling away. Mia reached her apartment, took off her coat, sat on the bed, and stared at the ceiling for 3 minutes wondering what had just happened. Then she picked up her phone to record an audio for Laura. She checked the recipient. Checked again. Checked a third time, with her finger trembling slightly over the screen, because since Wednesday night, every outgoing audio had required the solemnity of a nuclear security protocol. It was Laura. She recorded. The following Monday brought a new client to the office. Rodrigo Mendez. 42. Real estate developer from Barcelona. A project in Madrid he wanted to pitch to Aranda Architecture. Sebastian received him with Hugo in the large conference room, and after the initial meeting decided the project would be assigned to the young team for a first conceptual proposal. What happened in the hallway when Rodrigo Mendez walked out of the room and saw Mia pass by with a folder was that the man smiled in a way that had little to do with architecture. And you're part of the team? I'm an architect, said Mia, in her usual way, direct, no frills, not entirely registering the subtext. Very nice, said Rodrigo Mendez, with a smile that lasted 2 seconds longer than strictly necessary. Sebastian, who had stepped out of the room right behind him, watched the exchange. Rodrigo, said Sebastian, and his voice had something that wasn't quite a warning tone, but in Sebastian Aranda's register it functioned exactly like one. Let me walk you to reception. Rodrigo Mendez was walked to reception. Then Sebastian came back inside and said to Hugo, with perfect calm, that project I'll handle directly. No junior team. Hugo looked at him. Why? The budget is more complex than it appeared. Sebastian, he hasn't even given you the budget yet. I have instincts. What you have, said Hugo, very slowly, is a problem. I don't have any problem. Mr. Mendez was looking at Mia. Mr. Mendez is a client who looked at Mia. Hugo. I have a call. Hugo watched him walk into the office and close the door. Then he looked toward the open workspace where Mia was bent over her blueprints, completely unaware, copper hair falling across her face as she calculated something on the screen. And completely unaware as well that since Wednesday she had been holding her breath every time Sebastian stepped out of his office. Hugo Valcarcel had been Sebastian Aranda's business partner for 12 years. He knew perfectly well when that man was lying. Which was exactly right now. Some men, when they fall in love, process it with elegance and clarity. Sebastian Aranda was not those men. Sebastian Aranda processed it by canceling meetings, distributing sandwiches, and developing very specific opinions about clients who smiled too long. Mia, for her part, processed it by holding her breath. Between the two of them, they formed an absolutely disastrous communication team. Tuesday, Sebastian announced the trip. Mia, he said, appearing in the doorway of the open workspace with the project folder in hand. Thursday we go to Bilbao. Final presentation with the client. It was the first time he had included her in a client trip. The other three watched without watching, the technique they had perfected for observing without appearing to observe. And it was no coincidence. Of the 4 architects on the team, Mia was the one who had carried the Bilbao project from beginning to end. The floor plans, the natural light calculations for the auditorium, the facade proposal that had evolved through weeks and dozens of versions that only she and Sebastian had reviewed late, in work sessions after everyone else had gone home. If anyone on that team understood that project better than Sebastian himself, it was her. "All right," said Mia. "Train. Helicopter." Pause. "In a helicopter," repeated Mia. "It's more practical." And he left. Pablo waited 3 seconds, then said, very quietly, without looking up from his screen, "In a helicopter." "Don't," said Carla. "I'm just saying the train is perfectly fine." "Don't," Carla repeated. Wednesday night, the office emptied early. By 8 there was no one left, except Mia, finishing the final adjustments on the next day's presentation, and Sebastian in his office with the door open, which was also unusual. At 9, he came out with 2 cups of tea. "I don't drink coffee at this hour," he said, as if that explained why there were 2 cups and not 1, and set them on Mia's desk without waiting for an answer. Mia looked at the cup, looked at Sebastian, decided not to ask anything. Because any question these days could open a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. "Thank you," she said simply. Sebastian stood for a moment looking at the screen over her shoulder, the cultural center facade with light streaming through the gaps in the old industrial roof. Then, instead of going back to his office, he sat down in Carla's empty chair, across the table. Mia looked up, surprised. "What were your weekends like?" he said. The question was so unexpected that it took Mia a second to process that it wasn't about the project. "Sorry. Growing up. Your weekends." Sebastian wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his teacup, as if he needed a fixed point to hold the conversation in place. "I'm curious," he added. Mia put down her pencil. She thought. "My father had a small boat. Not for serious fishing, just for going out on Sundays. My sister and I would help him get it ready on Saturday afternoons, and Sunday we'd all go out and come back with salt in our hair, and my mother always had lunch ready when we arrived, like she knew exactly what time we were going to be back, even though we never came back at the same time." Sebastian listened with an attention Mia had never seen from him, not even in meetings with the most important clients. "After my sister had her kids, the Sundays changed," Mia continued, without him needing to ask anything further. "Now they're about soccer in the square. My older nephew is 7 and plays with a seriousness I've never seen in a professional. The little one still doesn't understand the rules, but he gets furious if anyone scores a goal while he's not watching." Sebastian smiled. A small smile, almost nothing, but Mia caught it. "And you?" she ventured to ask, because the question seemed to call for an answer in return. "What were yours like?" Sebastian took a moment before responding. When he did, his voice was different, lower, slower. "There was no boat," he said. "My father left when I was 8. My mother worked as a seamstress at home and also cleaning offices at night. On weekends, I would sit on the floor of the room where she worked and draw. Draw what? Buildings. Mia went very still. We didn't have money for notebooks, so I drew on the back of the sewing patterns. My mother would cut fabric along the lines on one side, and on the other side of those same sheets I drew floor plans, enormous buildings with many rooms. He paused, and something in his expression softened in a way Mia had never seen from him. My mother kept some of them. I still have a few in a box. A silence. Then, I don't tell this very often, he said. And for the first time in 18 months, Mia saw something that looked like vulnerability on that man's face. I don't know why I'm telling you now. Mia didn't know either. But she knew that something in that empty office at 9:30 at night, with 2 cups of tea going cold on the table, had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Sebastian nodded. He stood up. And before returning to his office, he said, without quite looking at her, tomorrow the flight is at 9. Don't be late. I'm never late, said Mia. I know, he said. And that time he did look at her. And that time Mia felt that those 2 words weighed far more than perfect. The Bilbao project was the conversion of an old steelworks factory into a luxury cultural center. 3 floors. A facade of steel and glass. Exhibition spaces, an auditorium, a rooftop restaurant with views of the river estuary. The client was a private foundation with a generous budget and demanding taste. The helicopter was private, small, loud, and absolutely extraordinary. Mia knew this the moment she saw it on the platform of the private airfield north of Madrid, with the morning sun bouncing off the cabin glass, and had to make an active effort to keep her face from betraying what she was thinking. Which was, essentially, this is not practical. This is something else entirely. And I don't know what to do with that information. Sebastian was already there when she arrived. Dark suit, no tie, the same expression as always. He looked at her when she stepped out of the taxi, gave a brief nod of greeting, and gestured for her to board. The helicopter lifted off over Madrid, and Mia Serrano, who had grown up watching the Cantabrian Sea from the cliffs of her village, discovered that Madrid from above had a geometry completely different from anything she had ever designed on paper. It's incredible, she said without realizing she was saying it out loud. Sebastian looked at her. Said nothing. But he looked at her. The flight lasted 40 minutes. At first Mia stayed quiet, the engine noise, the headsets, and the presence of Sebastian a foot and a half away in a very small space created a combination that required concentration. Then the landscape began to change, the Castilian plateau giving way to the greens of the north, and Mia gradually forgot that she was supposed to maintain composure. Look, she said, pointing downward as they flew over a stretch of coastline. The Cantabrian. Sebastian looked where she pointed. Is it like Cudillero? He asked. Mia turned toward him so fast her headset shifted. She had not said that word. Not on this flight. Not this week. Not, as far as she could recall with any certainty, at any point in the last 18 months in front of him. How do you know the name of my village? She said. The question came out faster and sharper than she intended. Sebastian looked at her. For one instant, just one, something crossed his expression that Mia couldn't quite identify. As if he had been about to say something and had decided at the last moment not to say it yet. Human resources, he said, with perfect calm. It's in your file. That was true. It was in her file. But it didn't explain why Sebastian Aranda, who by his own description in the audio remembered practically nothing that wasn't strictly necessary, could recall the name of a village of 4,000 people on the Asturian coast. Mia said nothing more. But the question, where did that come from? From a file, or from something else? Turned over in her mind for the rest of the flight, mixing with the other question that had gone unanswered all week. The two together formed one single question. How much did this man know about her that she had never told him? Yes, she said finally, carefully. It's similar. The color of the water is the same. Sebastian nodded and looked toward the coast. A silence settled between them, and it was not uncomfortable, which was in itself unusual. "Do you miss it?" he asked, without taking his eyes from the window. Mia took a moment to answer. "Yes," she said. "But I also love the work." He nodded again. Then, in a voice with something different in it, something quieter, "I know." Mia didn't know exactly what to do with that. So she looked at the Cantabrian Sea and let the helicopter keep flying. The meeting with the client went well. More than well. Mia presented the facade proposal with a clarity that made the foundation's director say, in the middle of the presentation, "Wait, can you explain the natural light section for the auditorium again? That's exactly what we've been trying to articulate for months." Mia explained it. The client took notes. Sebastian, seated to her left, said nothing during that part, but Mia, who had spent 18 months calibrating his silence, knew that this particular silence was different from the others. After the meeting, in the lobby of the foundation building while they waited for the car, Sebastian said, "Well done." 2 words. Mia felt the building expand 1 centimeter. "Thank you," she said. And that time her voice was normal. Not too small. It was at dinner that night that Claudia Ferrer appeared. They had been invited to the client's restaurant, a large table, several foundation representatives, Sebastian and Mia, when Claudia walked in accompanied by one of the foundation's directors, with whom she had a long-standing professional relationship. Mia didn't know who Claudia Ferrer was. She learned it from the way the conversations around her subtly reorganized when Claudia entered. Elegant. Assured. With the kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. She also learned it, with a precision that made her uncomfortable, from the way Sebastian faintly tensed at her side. Claudia crossed the room, kissed Sebastian on the cheek with the ease of someone who has history. "Sebastian. I didn't know you were on this project." "Claudia," he said, his voice completely neutral. In Sebastian's code, that could mean many things. Claudia's eyes moved to Mia with the quick, precise evaluation of someone who processes information efficiently. "And you are?" "Mia Serrano. Architect on Sebastian's team." "Ah," said Claudia, with a smile that was perfectly correct and simultaneously said exactly what it intended to say. "Interesting, Sebastian. You used to choose people for your team based on their track record." The silence lasted 2 seconds. "Mia has more talent than 90% of the architects I've ever worked with," said Sebastian, with an absolute calm that landed somewhere in Mia's chest in a way she didn't know where to put. Claudia smiled. Moved on. Mia looked at her wine glass. "Who is she?" she asked quietly, though she suspected the answer. "Someone from the past," said Sebastian. He didn't add anything more. But he also didn't look at Claudia for the rest of the night. He looked at Mia. They walked back to the hotel because October nights in the north of Spain have a clean cold and a street lamp glow over the river that turns any walk into something other than what it should be. They walked in silence for a minute. Then Sebastian stopped. "Before you say anything," he said, and his voice had something in it Mia had never heard from him before. A real hesitation, the kind he normally didn't allow himself. "There's something I need to tell you. And I need to say it now, because if I don't say it now, I don't know if I'll have the courage to say it later." Mia felt the ground in Bilbao become suddenly less solid beneath her feet. "All right," she said, carefully. "Last Tuesday," Sebastian began, looking at the river rather than at her, which in him was almost always the signal that something important was about to come out, "I received an audio from you." Mia stopped breathing. "An audio for your sister," he continued, "that for some reason I don't entirely understand arrived to me instead. 28 minutes. The Nervion River kept running. The lights of Bilbao kept reflecting on the water. And Mia Serrano felt the entire universe shrink to that bridge, that man, and the sentence that was about to finish pronouncing itself. "I listened to it," said Sebastian. "All of it. I know about your father. The 5 pills. The cardiologist. The evening pill Ernesto cheats on because it makes him sleepy. I know your nephew Martín is 7 and that you promised you'd beat him at soccer. I know Nico owes you a drawing of a dinosaur in a hard hat and has for 3 weeks. I know you think working for me is like talking to a very expensive building that doesn't answer back. He paused. And I know the rest. Mia put both hands over her face. Oh my God. Mia. No. Wait. I need a moment. Her voice came out muffled through her fingers. I have been going crazy for 1 week, 1 entire week, Sebastian, asking myself if you knew. Every sandwich, did you eat breakfast? Every time you offered to drive me, I was thinking, he knows, he doesn't know, he knows, he doesn't know, like some carnival fortune teller. And you knew. I knew. Since when? From the moment I received it. Tuesday at 6:43. And why didn't you say anything? Sebastian turned toward her at last. Because I didn't know how, he said, with an honesty that in him was practically nakedness. Because the first time I listened to it I literally choked on a coffee. The second time I laughed alone on my sofa like an idiot. And the third time I understood that I had spent 18 months looking at you without letting myself know that I was looking at you. And I didn't know how to say any of those things without sounding exactly as desperate as they sounded. Mia went very still. Third time, she repeated. Sebastian. You listened to it 3 times. That's not what's important right now. That is absolutely what's important right now. He let out that brief, low sound that in another man would have been a laugh. Yes, he admitted. 3 times. And I laughed at the expensive building part. And I thought a lot about Nico's dinosaur. And there hasn't been a single day since then that I've been able to get the part out of my head, the part where you say you think you chose the wrong order of things. Mia lowered her hands from her face. Since we're being honest, she said, and her voice had suddenly gone much steadier than she felt on the inside, then I also have something to say. Sebastian waited. I know this complicates everything, said Mia. I know you're my boss and I should be smarter than this. But I think I'm falling in love with you. I've thought that for months, actually, long before the audio. The audio only said it out loud. Because my mouth, apparently, has no safety filter whatsoever. She paused. My sister always tells me I'm a dreamer. That I waited too long for a prince who probably doesn't exist. And that when someone finally appeared who resembled one, he turned out to be completely out of reach. Like you. Sebastian looked at her. How long have you been thinking that? Too long, said Mia. And you? Sebastian didn't answer with words. He took her face in both hands, slowly, the way someone does something they have been calculating for a very long time and then decides the calculation isn't enough. And he kissed her. Mia had not been kissed many times in her life. But she knew immediately, with a certainty that needed no comparison, that this was different from anything she had imagined. He kissed slowly, as if he had all the time in the world and had decided to use it. His hands were still on her face. Mia gripped his jacket with her fingers without realizing she was doing it. When they separated, the Nervion was still running. The lights of Bilbao were still reflected in the water. Nothing had changed. Except everything. The hotel room had windows that looked out over the river. Sebastian closed the door and turned to Mia with a look that was different from the office, different from the meetings, different from the last 18 months. There was something in it that was more direct and at the same time more careful, as if he knew exactly what he wanted and also exactly what he did not want to get wrong. Are you sure? He said. I've been sure for 18 months, said Mia. What passed between them in that room, the connection that had been building for a year and a half, the honesty of that accidental audio, the weight of everything left unsaid for too long, all of it dissolved in the dark. When morning came, and the pale October light began to paint the window silver, Mia lay in the warmth of his arms with the quiet understanding that something had changed forever. She didn't regret a single moment of it. "Good morning," she said, when she opened her eyes and found him already awake, watching the ceiling with his usual expression, but calmer now, as if something had been resolved during the night. "Good morning," he said. A silence. But a good one. "I'm hungry," said Mia. "Breakfast runs until 10. It's 8:30. "Yes." She looked at him sideways. "There's no room service." "There is room service." "Good," said Mia, and picked up the bedside phone with a calm she absolutely did not feel on the inside. "I'll order for both of us." Sebastian looked at her. And that morning, in a hotel room in Bilbao with the windows open and the northern breeze coming through, Sebastian Aranda ate breakfast for the first time in years without any hurry to be anywhere. For those of you who didn't see it coming, welcome. For those of you who saw it coming from the very beginning, we have the same taste. If this moment left your heart in your throat, tell us in the comments, have you ever waited this long for someone who was right in front of you all along? And if you haven't subscribed to fall in love with this story, this is the moment. What's coming is far from over. Mia came back to Madrid different. Not visibly different. She didn't cut her hair or change her wardrobe or arrive at the office with a different attitude. She arrived the same. Sat at her desk the same. Opened her blueprints the same. But inside, something had completely rearranged itself. For 18 months, Mia had been the girl who wondered if she had the right to take up space. The one who measured every word before saying it. Who apologized for interrupting. Who had carried her desire, because she had been carrying it all this time, even if she had never allowed herself to name it that way, tucked under layers of professionalism and embarrassment, as if it were something to hide before anyone noticed how much it weighed. Now that desire had a name. It had a direction. And the person it was directed toward knew about it and felt the same. And yet, and this was what Mia hadn't told anyone, not even Laura, a part of her was still the girl from before. The one who was afraid. The one who, when she looked in the mirror these days, saw at the same time the woman who had spent the most intimate night of her life held in Sebastian Aranda's arms, and the girl from Quitollero who still wasn't entirely sure what to do with her hands when someone admired her. Both things were true at the same time. Mia felt, for the first time, completely adult and completely lost, at exactly the same moment. What she did know, without any doubt, was that the night in Bilbao, with everything that had and hadn't happened, had left her something much stronger than frustration. Relief. The relief that the only man she had thought about, dreamed about, trembled over for 18 months, desired her with that same intensity, and had still chosen to take care of her first. That gave her, in some strange way, courage. Thursday evening, Mia called Sebastian. "I have a couple of questions about the dimensions on the north facade," she said, in a voice that sounded perfectly professional and had taken her 3 attempts to get right. "If you have a moment tonight, I could come by your place and we could go over them." There was a silence on the other end. A silence that lasted perhaps 1 second too long. Sebastian Aranda, who made million-euro decisions in the time it took others to blink, took that extra second to respond. Not because he doubted whether he wanted her to come. But for exactly the opposite reason. Because he wanted it so much that for a moment he didn't trust his own voice to say yes without it sounding like what it really was. "Of course," he said finally. "I'll be here." Mia showered. She stood in front of the wardrobe longer than she was willing to admit. At the back, hanging there, was the dress. Laura had given it to her the year before, for when you have something to celebrate. It had spent 12 months in that wardrobe waiting for a more specific instruction that never came. Until now. It was a deep green, almost emerald. A fabric that fell with its own weight. A neckline that wasn't excessive but didn't apologize for itself either. And a back that left exposed just enough that when she moved, the fabric glided across her skin with a sensation Mia felt even before she put it on. She put it on. She looked in the mirror. And for a moment, just a moment, the girl from Cudillero and the woman from Bilbao looked at each other from the same reflection. Mia felt that strange vertigo of not entirely knowing which of the two was in charge. She was afraid. A huge fear, the size of everything she didn't know, everything she had never done. And at the same time, a quiet, luminous certainty that this fear was not a signal that she was wrong. It was only the signal that this, whatever this was, mattered. She wore her hair down. She took a taxi to the Salamanca neighborhood. Sebastián opened the door of his penthouse apartment and was speechless. The green dress fell over her in a way that seemed specifically designed to dismantle the composure of any man with a sense of design. And Sebastián Aranda had a very strong sense of design. Her copper hair fell loose over her bare shoulders. And her expression, that was the part that truly undid him. Not the dress. Not the hair. Her expression was not the one from the office, not from the helicopter, not from Bilbao. It was something more direct than all of those. It was the expression of someone who has made a decision and is no longer waiting for anyone to validate it. Mia, he said. You said you wanted me to think, she said. Sebastián said nothing. I thought, said Mia, and walked in. He stepped back, which was the appropriate response when someone walks into your home with that kind of purpose. I don't think I thought very much, she continued, as if he hadn't been about to start a sentence. I thought about why you stopped, and I understand the reasons, they're good reasons. And I also thought that I'm 25 years old and I know exactly what I want. And that if I waited for the situation to be perfect, I'd probably be waiting until I was 70. Sebastián looked at her with that look that said more than what it said. Mia, we're in a situation. I know what situation we're in. You're my boss. I'm your employee. That's complicated. She paused. Do you have anything else? For the first time in a long time, Sebastián Aranda had nothing to say. Mia took one step closer. Because if you don't have anything else, she said, in a voice that was low and completely steady, neither do I. Sebastián Aranda, the man who intimidated boardrooms full of directors, closed 8-figure contracts without losing his composure, the man who had gone 14 years without choking on anything until the Tuesday of the audio, stood silent in front of a 25-year-old woman in a green dress and couldn't finish any of the sentences he started. Mia put one hand on the lapel of his shirt. And Sebastián, who was a man who made decisions with speed and precision, made the only decision that in that moment made any sense. He kissed her. This time there was no cautious pause. His hands on her waist, then on her bare back, then in her copper hair that wound between his fingers with a will of its own. Mia had her hands on his neck and wasn't thinking about anything, except this, which was exactly where she wanted to be. He led her toward the bedroom. And this time, Sebastián Aranda did not stop. This time was everything the night in Bilbao had promised, with the difference that there were no hotel room nerves, no business dinner wine. Only her. Only him. Only the Madrid light coming through the penthouse windows. And the time it had taken to arrive here, which was too much, but which made every single thing exactly what it was meant to be. By morning, the light of Madrid looked different from that penthouse. Everything was different from that penthouse. Sebastián brought her coffee without being asked. He left it on the bedside table with his usual expression, but with something underneath it that Mia already knew how to read. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, he said, and then sat on the edge of the bed and watched her drink the coffee. Which was, without any doubt, the most eloquent gesture he had ever made in his life. That was, in fact, the third night that week Mia had stayed at the penthouse, something neither of them had needed to say out loud, but which the building's doorman, with the professional discretion of someone who had worked there for years, had begun to quietly register. Claudia Ferrer was intelligent. That was the first thing that needed to be said about her, because everything else, the elegance, the coolness, the way she entered a room, worked precisely because it was supported by a genuine intelligence. And Claudia also had a perfectly legitimate reason to be in the lobby of Sebastián's building. The morning of the following week, a joint project between her firm and Aranda Architecture had a pending signature. Sebastian had told her to stop by early, before the office, to handle it quickly. Claudia arrived at 8:15. The elevator doors opened in the lobby just as Mia was walking out. Mia was wearing the same green dress from the night before, now with a jacket over it that didn't quite conceal anything. Hair pinned up in whatever shape it had landed. And that particular glow that people have when they have slept very little and have been, in some meaningful way, very happy. "Good morning, Miss Serrano," said the doorman, with the familiarity of someone who already knew her name by heart. "Good morning, Manuel," said Mia, and walked out to the street without noticing Claudia, who had gone very still beside the elevator. Claudia Ferrer didn't need any more data. The dress from the night before. The doorman's familiarity, "Miss Serrano," the way you greet someone whose name you already know well, implying this was not the first time or the second. And the fact that barely 3 weeks earlier, at a dinner in Bilbao, Sebastian Aranda had defended that same girl with a vehemence Claudia had never seen him employ in 12 years of knowing him, not even to defend himself. Claudia made no scene. Claudia didn't make scenes. She went upstairs, signed the document, was exquisitely professional with Sebastian for the 15 minutes the meeting lasted, and left. But that same week, in the professional circles where Claudia Ferrer moved with the ease of someone who has been swimming those waters for years, a small comment began to circulate. "Almost nothing." A phrase said over laughs at a lunch. About Aranda's new taste for young, very dedicated architects. The phrase reached Aranda Architecture in less than 4 days. Mia began to notice things. A stare from a colleague in the hallway that lasted too long. A silence that closed when she walked into the kitchen. Pablo, who was constitutionally incapable of keeping secrets, avoiding looking at her directly, which in Pablo was equivalent to a neon sign. Friday, in the bathroom, she overheard 2 words of a conversation between 2 people from the admin team. The 2 words were her name and "the boss." The context was clear enough. Mia washed her hands. Looked at herself in the mirror. Walked out of the bathroom with exactly the same face she had walked in with. She went directly to Sebastian's office and closed the door. He looked up. "Do you know what they're saying?" she said, without preamble. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. "Yes. And I don't care what they say." "I do," said Mia. "I care a great deal." She paused. "I came here for my work. For my projects. I spent 5 years in school and 3 more in other firms building something. And now the conversation in the hallways is not about my projects." She stopped. Then continued. "You can ignore it because you have 40 people working for you and a company with your name on the door. I'm 25 with a career that's just beginning. It's not the same." Sebastian was silent. "I'm going to put in my voluntary resignation," said Mia. He stood up. "This isn't a question," said Mia. "I know what Claudia is. I understand you have a history and that it's complicated. But what I'm not going to do is stay here while everyone decides whether my work is mine or the result of something else." Her voice didn't tremble. That was the most important thing. It didn't tremble. "I wanted to learn from you," she said. "Not become someone everyone wonders what she did to get there." "What you did was work better than everyone else," said Sebastian, in a voice that had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. "I know that," said Mia. "But that doesn't change anything right now." Silence. "And us?" he said. It was the first time he had said, "us," out loud, in any context. Mia looked at him. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But first I need to know that what I have is mine." And she left. The voluntary resignation letter was delivered to Human Resources the following day. Hugo saw her leave the building from the hallway and went directly to Sebastian's office. "What happened?" "She left." "I can see that." "Why?" "Because she's right," said Sebastian. Hugo looked at him for a long moment. And what are you going to do? Sebastian looked out at the midday Madrid skyline. Wait. How long? As long as it takes. Laura's call came on a Tuesday evening. Mia was in her apartment, which since leaving the company had begun to feel smaller and quieter, working on her first freelance project, the restoration of a modernista building in the center of Madrid for a private art gallery. When the phone buzzed with her sister's name, Laura's voice was the same as always, calm and direct, but with something underneath it. "Dad is fine," said Laura, before anything else. "I want you to know that before I tell you the rest. He's fine. But this afternoon he had an episode. His blood pressure spiked. He's been admitted to get it regulated. The cardiologist says they'll discharge him in 2 or 3 days." Mia closed her laptop. "I'm on my way." "You don't have to." "I'm on my way, Lau." Cudillero in October had that soft gray of the north, not sadness, but intimacy. The sea was calm when Mia arrived the next day on the first train, then the regional bus that took 40 minutes winding along the coastal curves. The hospital was in Oviedo, half an hour from the village. Her father was in a room with a window overlooking the parking lot, blood pressure under control, humor perfectly intact despite everything. "I told you it was the evening pill," said Ernesto when Mia walked in. "Something always happens when I don't take it." "Dad," said Mia. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You look like the one who's sick." Mia sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand and said nothing for a while. Her father didn't say anything either. It was the silence of people who have loved each other for a long time. Ernesto watched her with the look fathers have when they see things their children believe they've hidden. "What's going on with you?" he said. "Nothing. I'm here with you. Mia." She sighed. "I left the job." "I know. Laura told me. And you know what you're doing." He squeezed her hand. "Almost always," he said. "That's already quite a lot." The next day, Mia was in the village square with Martín and Nico when the car arrived. Martín was kicking the ball with his usual focus. Nico had agreed to sit on the bench with Mia while explaining, with a gravity wildly disproportionate to his 4 years, the characteristics of the dinosaur architect that still hadn't arrived by mail. "It has a hard hat," Nico announced. "And a very big blueprint." "A blueprint of what?" "Of its dinosaur house. It has lots of rooms." "Of course. Dinosaur architects always design with lots of rooms." "You do too." "I do too." "Do you have a hard hat?" "No. But I have a set square." Nico processed this with great seriousness. It was then that Mia saw the car pull up on the street bordering the square. A Madrid car. And from it stepped Sebastian Aranda. Sleeves rolled up to the elbows. Top button open. No jacket, he had left it, without thinking, on the passenger seat somewhere along the 5 hours he had just driven without stopping. And he had a look Mia had never seen on him before. Slightly undone. The look of someone who has been driving too long thinking about one single thing. He saw her. Mia didn't move from the bench. Sebastian crossed the square, nodded briefly to Nico, who evaluated him with the critical gaze of a 4-year-old, and stood in front of Mia. "How's your father?" he said. "Better. They're discharging him tomorrow." "Good." Silence. Martín kicked the ball toward the bench and Sebastian, by a reflex he clearly didn't expect to have, stopped it with his foot. Martín looked at him. "Do you play?" he said, with the direct assessment of a 7-year-old who has no time for preamble. Sebastian looked at Mia. Mia looked at Sebastian. "I'm quite bad," said Sebastian. "Doesn't matter," said Martín. "My aunt is quite bad too." "Hey," said Mia. Sebastian Aranda, CEO of Aranda Architecture and Engineering, went to play soccer in the square of Quillayero with a 7-year-old who beat him within the first 3 minutes without breaking a sweat. Mia watched. And something that had been tense since the afternoon she handed in her resignation letter slowly began to loosen, without her making any conscious decision about it. Later, when Nico had fallen asleep on the bench with his head in Mia's lap and Martine had accepted a diplomatic draw, Sebastian came and sat beside her. They looked at the sea visible at the end of the street. "How did you know?" said Mia. "Laura called me." Mia closed her eyes for a second. "I'm going to have a conversation with Laura. Don't be hard on her." He looked at the sea. "The day you handed in your resignation, before you left the building, I asked her for her number. I told her I wasn't going to pressure you about anything, that I understood completely why you were leaving and that you were right to leave. I just asked her that if there was ever anything I could actually help with, something real, not related to me or to work, to let me know, in case you ever needed something and had no one nearby to ask." Mia looked at him. "You asked my sister for that on the same day I resigned." "The same day." "Sebastian. I know what you're going to say. That the situation is complicated. That your career is yours. That you don't want to grow in my shadow." He paused. "That you're right about all of it." Mia said nothing. "I thought what I wanted was to protect you," said Sebastian, in a lower voice. "I told myself it was that you were young and alone here and your father was sick and you had left all of this," he gestured toward the village, the sea, the square, "to come work with me, and that deserved protection. I don't need protecting. I know. I figured that out fairly quickly." He paused. "The truth is, what I wanted was a place in your world. Not to protect you from it. In this one. In the one with your father. Your nephews. The endless audios you send your sister. The Sunday soccer games with a 7-year-old who just humiliated me athletically." Mia let out something that was very close to a laugh. "I don't want you to come back to Madrid for me," he continued. "I want you to come back if you can also let me walk beside you." The sea was calm. Nico slept with his feet dangling off the bench. "There's something from the audio I didn't mention in Bilbao," Sebastian added after a moment. "The part where you said maybe you had chosen the wrong order of things. Work first, everything else after. And that everything else had been on pause for 18 months. Mia went still. "I don't want you to keep waiting, Mia," he said. "Everything else doesn't have to wait for anything anymore." Mia looked at him for a long moment. Then, because she needed to say something and because nerves always found the most absurd exit possible, she said, "Do you know how long that audio was?" Sebastian looked at her with the ghost of a smile. 28 minutes. 35, at least. They were 35 minutes of humiliation. 28. "Don't correct me." Sebastian made that brief, low sound again. In him, it was laughter. "It was the most honest audio anyone has ever sent me in my life," he said. "And for the record, also the longest I have ever listened to in full. 3 times. I'm throwing my phone in the sea." "Don't. That's where I have the dinosaur drawing Nico still owes me." Mia laughed. "For real." And the Cantabrian Sea stayed there, quiet and steady, as if it had all been calculated long before. Epilogue. The restoration proposal for the Villanueva building in the center of Madrid won the Community of Madrid Young Architecture competition 6 months later. Mia found out on a Thursday afternoon, reading her email in her studio, what she had decided to call the second bedroom of her apartment, which now had a large table, a monitor, and too many plants. She froze for 30 seconds. Then stood up. Then took 3 steps with no clear destination. Then called Laura. Laura screamed. Laura's scream woke Nico, who asked what was happening. Laura told him that Aunt Mia had won a competition. Nico processed this and asked if the competition was for soccer. Laura said no, architecture. Nico said, "Oh," with a polite disappointment that Mia heard in the background, and that made her laugh alone in her studio with a laugh that was one of the real ones. Then she called Sebastian. "I won the competition," she said, when he picked up, her voice still trembling slightly. There was a silence on the other end. A strange silence, too long to be surprise. "I know," he said finally. Mia frowned. "How do you know?" "I just got the results right now. I've been refreshing the competition page every 20 minutes since 9 this morning," she admitted, in the voice of someone who knows exactly how ridiculous that sounds and has decided to say it anyway. "Hugo asked me 3 times if I was all right. I told him I had an important meeting." A pause. "The meeting was F5. Mia laughed. "You didn't do anything, right? No letters, no calls. Nothing. You won alone. With your name, your project, and your way of understanding the air between things, which is still the best I have ever seen. All I did was obsessively refresh a website for 6 hours. That's a little pathetic." "It is. I loved every second of it," said Mia. What followed was easier and more complicated at the same time, which was exactly how Mia had imagined it would be. Easy, because Sebastian, once he had decided something deserved his full attention, was absolutely consistent. He was there. He asked more than before, though still not much. And when Mia told him things, he listened with a concentration that no longer intimidated her, but instead made her feel that what she said mattered. Complicated, because they were two people with very different rhythms, very different ways of processing things. Because building something real between two people who have been alone for a long time is a project with its own deadlines and its own blueprints to redraw. But Mia was an architect. She knew how to work with blueprints that changed. And Sebastian was a man who, once he had decided to build something, didn't leave it unfinished. The wedding was small, not because they couldn't have done something bigger, but because neither of them wanted bigger. Sebastian, because he considered extended ceremonies an inefficient use of resources. Mia, because she wanted the people she loved, not a list. It was in Cudillero. Ernesto Serrano, blue pill organizer in his jacket pocket, blood pressure perfectly controlled, walked his daughter to the altar with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this moment long before she knew it. Martín carried the rings with a solemnity nobody had asked for but which he considered appropriate to the occasion. Nico carried the flowers, scattered them in the wrong direction, but with great enthusiasm. Laura, who had been the unofficial logistics coordinator for the whole operation for months, cried from the very beginning and didn't admit it until the end. Hugo Valcarcel, who had witnessed the entire story from the accidental audio to this moment, toasted at the dinner with the expression of someone who has been right and has had the elegance not to say it aloud for too long. "I saw this coming," he said to Sebastian at one point. "I know," said Sebastian. "Since the sandwiches. I just want to say I'm very good at these things, Hugo. And that Pablo was never any danger. Hugo. This is my wedding and it's beautiful," said Hugo, raising his glass. "Congratulations, Sebastian." The audio arrived on a Tuesday. Laura received it at 6:48 in the evening and opened it while setting the table for dinner, phone propped on the kitchen counter, waiting for her sister's weekly podcast. What she heard was not exactly what she expected. "Lau. Hi. It's 6:48 and I'm sitting in the bathroom of the Salamanca penthouse and there's a plastic thing on the sink that has 2 lines and I only asked for one and I think I need you to explain what that means because what it means can't be what it means because that would imply that, Lau. A pause. "No, wait. I know what it means. I know. I know perfectly well what it means. I just need a moment for my brain to process it, because I have been staring at this for 3 minutes and I still can't quite believe it's real." A breath. "I'm pregnant, Lau. I'm pregnant and Sebastian is in the kitchen making coffee and he has no idea any of this is happening. And I am sitting here with my heart at 200 beats a minute and I don't know whether to laugh or cry or run, though running wouldn't make any sense, because where would I even go? I live here." A pause. This is your fault. No, that doesn't make sense. But something is your fault. I'll figure out what. Lao, what do I do now? Not in the medical sense, I know that part. In the sense of, how do I walk out of this bathroom and tell that man that we have designed something that was not on any blueprint? A very short pause. Okay. I'm coming out. I'm coming out right now. Wait, I'm coming. The audio ended. Laura stood motionless in her kitchen, phone in hand, for 4 seconds. Then another audio arrived. Lao, it's me again. I told him. And now Sebastian is right here and he wants to talk to you. The sound of a phone changing hands. Then the voice of Sebastian Aranda, which Laura had heard on many occasions, but never quite like this. With that particular note of a man who has just received information that has completely rearranged him. Laura. It's Sebastian. Mia is fine. We're both fine. A pause. I need to ask you a favor. In the background, Mia's voice, Sebastian, it's just a question. Laura, he continued, you have kept a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, which is, according to all available research, the most dangerous age range in childhood, alive and well for years. Mia and I, on the other hand, have just discovered that this exists, 4 minutes ago, and neither of us has the slightest idea what we're doing. That's not entirely true, said Mia in the background. It is completely true, said Sebastian. Laura, what I want to ask is this, when the time comes, could you come to Madrid for a while? Not to move. To help us avoid destroying a human being in the first few weeks, which, according to what I've read in the last 15 minutes of panic, is harder than it sounds. A pause. Laura stood in her kitchen in Cudillero, 2 healthy children, a husband, a father to look after, an entire life organized around that village, looked at the ceiling for a moment. And then she laughed. A long laugh, one of the ones that needed to come out. Of course I'll come, she said. But let's be clear, Sebastian, I'm not moving. I have 2 kids, a husband, and a father who cheats on his medication and needs weekly supervision. But I can come for a few weeks when the baby arrives and visit more often than I do now. That's more than enough, said Sebastian. And in his voice was something Laura had never heard before. A note of genuine, almost childlike relief. From the other side of the phone, Mia's voice, broken in 2 by something that was both crying and laughing at once. I love you, Lao. And Sebastian's voice, lower, thank you, Laura. And so it was that Mia Serrano Valdez, architect, 25 years old, well, 27 by then, copper-haired, former employee and now partner at Aranda Architecture, winner of the Community of Madrid Young Architecture competition by her own absolute merit, and a woman who had left a village of colorful houses to find something she didn't know exactly she was looking for, ended up with a penthouse in Salamanca, a husband who asked more questions than before, though still not many, a baby on the way that nobody had put in the blueprints, and her sister's promise to come when needed. It wasn't on any of the models she had designed. But it had exactly the right proportion between what is planned and what is simply built. She called it the most beautiful project of her life. Sebastian, a man of very few words, heard that, and said, perfect. And this time, she knew exactly how much that word was worth. And there you have it. The most important podcast Mia Serrano ever recorded. If this story found its way into your heart, tell me below, what was your favorite moment? Or did this story make you think of someone you waited too long for without realizing it? Comment below, I love reading every single one. And if you're not yet part of Fall in Love with this story, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. See you in the next story.